Welcome, everybody. It's great to have everybody here for the 2021 Rights Tech Summit. My name is Ned Sherman. I am one of the co-chairs of the conference today, and my other co-chair, Paul Sweeting, is right here next to me. Paul is the CEO of Concurrent Media Strategies, and I'm one of the founders of Digital Media Wire and a partner at Manat, Phelps & Phillips. We have 2 days of panels and sessions, and I'll let Paul talk a little bit about the agenda and some of the topics that we'll cover. But before that, let me ask you guys to introduce yourselves. Now, I'm going to do this right now, going to the chat, and in the chat, make sure to select everybody in the drop down, and then you can make introductions, post comments. Hope to connect with a lot of you guys through LinkedIn as well. Also, if you have questions for any of the panels throughout the day, you can go to the Q&A button on the bottom nav and post your questions there, and they'll go directly to the moderator and panelists, and we try to get to as many questions as we can. We really try to have each session end at 45 past the hour so that you have 15 minutes or so to do things you need to do between sessions. So we'll try to keep things on pace and on time as best that we can. So Paul, tell us a little bit about this year's program.
Yeah, we have what I think is a terrific program over the next 2 days. We're going to be talking about some some key issues such as life after COVID, assuming there is an after COVID at some point. But we'll also be talking about issues like how to straighten out the increasingly complex and varied money flows in the digital media realm, but also, how to unlock the full value of media content, and as well as some new approaches to turning the long-term value of copyrights into short-term cash through some innovative financial strategies that have come along in the last year or so. We'll also be talking about some new issues, such as the movement around the world by a number of governments, Australia, European Union, and even the United States, toward providing or extending greater negotiating leverage to news publishers of various types as they bargain for over usage rights and payments from digital platforms like Facebook and Google. And we'll be revisiting some older, more familiar issues like blockchain, which 4 or 5 years ago, if you remember, was the girl everybody wanted to take to the prom. She then sort of fell out of fashion. But in the more recent time, she's making a comeback now with a college education, I guess, and a little more sophisticated approach to things. So we'll be checking in on her as well. So I think it should be a great program. I hope everyone sticks around for the next 2 days. And I'd like to join with Ned in thanking our sponsors and media and promotional partners, our sponsors, Orfium and Exactuals, and our partners in promotion and media exposure, Think Tank, Event Browse, the International Association of Entertainment Lawyers, and there was one other, I'm forgetting.
Oh,
Fusicology.
Fusicology, yeah.
Fusicology. My apologies there. So I think it should be interesting, entertaining, and hopefully valuable 2 days.
Fantastic. Well, listen, we're going to get started here. And again, thank you to the sponsors. We can't do these programs without your support. So, and a big congratulations to Tinzar and Laura and Emma and the team at Digital Media Wire for working with Paul to put together such an amazing program today. Our first session of the day is titled View from the Top, Deals and Deal Making for the New Normal. The great COVID lockdown of 2020 sparked or accelerated adoption of new monetization strategies and new licensing models, from live stream concerts and virtual events to direct digital movie releases and dynamic payment models. How many will continue beyond the pandemic? How much will be jettisoned? Where do we go from here? Let me introduce our panelists. Michele Cobb, Executive Director of Audio Publishers Association. Welcome, Michele.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Bret Heiman, VP of Global Partnerships, AEG Presents. Welcome, Bret.
Everybody.
Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Joe Keymoore, Senior Director of Global Acquisitions, FilmRise. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. And Peter Rafelson, co-founder of ElectraCast. Peter, welcome.
Ned, Paul, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And our moderator, Paul Sweeting, founder and principal, Concurrent Media Strategies. Have a great panel, folks.
Thanks, Ned, and welcome, panelists. Glad you could all join us here today, and hello to everybody out there watching. As we were sort of alluding to, 2020 was obviously a very challenging year in the media industries as well as the rest of the world. And so far, unfortunately, 2021 hasn't been a whole lot better. Just as it seemed we might be turning the corner on COVID, we seem to, in fact, have circled back almost to the beginning. So it's a little bit discouraging. And yet, almost, as if to prove the old adage that necessity is the mother of invention, it's been also been a period of really remarkable innovation across a lot of different media sectors, as people adopted new distribution strategies, new business models, and audiences developed new habits for reading, watching, listening to media content. So it's been a pretty remarkable period for innovation, albeit sort of forced upon us. We saw an explosion in the amount of live music streaming, which had been around, but underwent a period of really accelerated growth and innovation over the last 18 months. We've seen, we saw a huge spike in the amount of video streaming happening, which, has led to a lot of new approaches to the acquisition and licensing of content by streaming platforms. And, we saw a significant growth in all forms of spoken word audio, from audio books to podcasts and to other types of non-music audio streaming. And we have a great panel here. Ned briefly introduced them. I'll just give you the executive summary of their bios, which are all their full bios are all online on the Rights Tech Summit website. But we have Bret, who Ned introduced, who is the Vice President of Global Partnerships at AEG Presents, one of the largest live event producers, promoters, sponsors in the business. And he's responsible for securing brand partnerships across AEG's entire portfolio of festivals, clubs, digital properties, and so forth, including, of course, the Coachella Festival, which is had been historically one of the largest music gatherings each summer. He focuses on sales and negotiations of partnerships and has closed deals with Anheuser-Busch, Uber, Amazon, Pandora, Harley-Davidson, Subway, and many other top brands. So welcome, Bret. Peter Rafelson is the co-founder of ElectraCast, but he's got his fingers in many different media and technology areas. He's a entrepreneur, investor, also an award-winning artist, writer, director, and producer. He's written written or produced over 30 #1 hit songs, including Madonna's iconic hit, Open Your Heart. And he is also, for those who might find his name familiar, the son of the iconic film director and producer, Bob Rafelson, who directed Easy Rider, 5 Easy Pieces, and I think he had something to do with the Monkees, although I'm not sure exactly what his involvement is there. Although I did note that the Monkees, their show, the Monkees TV show, debuted on television 50 years ago this week. So this is Monkey Week. And Michele Cobb is the executive director of the Audio Publishers Association. She began her audiobook career at LA Theater Works, where she serves as audio sales director. She worked for the BBC's audiobook division for a number of years and has recently expanded into the world of podcasts and is the also now the executive director of the Podcast Academy. And finally, but not least, Joe Keymoore is the director of global acquisitions at FilmRise, based in Brooklyn, which is an AVOD platform, AVOD video streaming platform. She only joined there in April, I believe, so she probably hasn't even met some of her coworkers in person yet because everybody's still working from home. But before joining FilmRise, she worked in format licensing at Saturday Night Live, was it? I believe, and helped launch the format business at Viacom CBS, and worked in acquisitions at Cinedigm, and for the last 4 years was the global content acquisition, was in the global content acquisition unit at Viacom CBS. So welcome to you all. Let me start with Bret. So the live music sector suffered probably more disruption than any other sector, with venues being shut down, festivals being banned, basically, essentially prohibited, and artists and bands who rely on touring for a lot of their income were pretty out of pocket. But it also saw quite a lot of innovation with, as I mentioned, the explosion in live streaming events, musical performances. We saw a lot more integration of live music with other types of media and platforms, like particularly the gaming platforms. So what is your current read, Bret, on where things stand in the live performance space? There have been a few shows that have managed to get on the boards, but now people are starting to rethink those. What the hell is going on in live music performance?
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to everyone today. I think that we're in a very interesting time right now, and obviously now sort of in the, I guess maybe it's the second or third stage of this pandemic. We have we're looking to the future, but we're also embracing some of the things that have worked for us throughout once this all started. And just by way of background, when everything shut down from the live event space and from the sector that I work in as it relates to putting on concerts and live shows, the powers that be, we all sort of came together and said, how can we pivot, in this new paradigm? How can we potentially get musicians back to work? How can we offer up these performances, to the masses, so that there's going to be something to engage with, while everyone is at home? And, what we were able to put together, we aligned with the streaming platform Twitch, which I believe, if you're not familiar, is, as very, very popular in the gaming space. But they were in sort of an interesting time within their growth, which was how do we sort of evolve out of, just one vertical into other verticals, and music being sort of that, I guess, the most obvious choice. We connected with the team over there and said, hey, we're looking to do something unique. We have the venues to potentially host artists and so on, put them in a COVID compliant environment. Would you guys be interested in potentially streaming this and taking this to the masses? And what we did was strike a deal where Twitch came on and actually paid for all of the production that goes along with having these artists come into one of our venues. We chose Brooklyn Steel out of Brooklyn, New York, which is an esteemed venue. Some of the biggest artists come through there, and they paid us a healthy sort of fee to come in and take care of all the production, and obviously using sort of the IP of the Bowery Presents, which is an AEG partner promoter, and said, hey, you guys book the bands, we'll pay for all the production, and then we'll stream this out on a weekly basis of a 30-show run, and give everyone, something excited, to watch. And, up until that point, a lot of artists, what you had seen was a lot of artists were also pivoting and doing things where they were, doing their own streams and maybe doing some things in silos, just trying to get content out to their fan base. By working with the Bowery Presents, which is, the biggest New York promoter in AEG, which sort of saw the opportunity and said, hey, we can lever the cachet of working with promoters such as this and really drive big numbers into our viewership. And the way we're going to do that is give you guys homepage promotion, right? So whenever someone's done with one gaming thing in Japan or whatever, they would come then over to the Bowery stream. So this was seemingly a really exciting endeavor, which has proven to be quite successful, over the course of, I think we're in our 25th week now, but this launched in early May of last year. Forgive me, I'm not sure the exact start date, but through that, we've also been able to monetize the streamership by way of bringing on sponsors. So we are working with Toyota currently, who's our presenting sponsor of the stream, where they've signed on for a healthy investment where they're presenting all of these concerts taking place, and attaching themselves to these up and coming artists that we're billing week after week. So this has been a really exciting endeavor on a few different fronts, because we're gaining the viewership that we're excited. We're promoting these artists. We're paying the artists, right, which were seemingly out of work during the COVID shutdown, and we've turned the machines back on, right?
And where does that go? I mean, at some point, we have to assume fans can get back on the road.
That's right. Yep.
And tour and perform in front of a live audience. Does all of that infrastructure that you've created now around, streaming presentations, does that just go away? Does that remain part of what a tour becomes? Where do you see that?
It's a good question, Paul. And what we have developed is once we sort of started success, that there are people paying attention and seeing the stickiness to each of these performances. We've engaged with Twitch to extend the current agreement we have with them, where we're now actually wiring up one of our other venues, Music Hall of Williamsburg, for a Q4 run of shows, right? So this is with a live audiences in attendance. And we believe that there's an opportunity, right, for fans to be engaging with the show, and the artists to be actually supporting the fact that Twitch is streaming, their performance and promoting it, worldwide. So, there might be some artists, I think, that might not be that into it, right, or might require some, ginormous fee in order to do that. But a lot of the artists that we are promoting as it relates to, Bowery Presents type of talent are jumping at the chance to take part in this. And one of the unique things that Twitch is doing is sort of what they coined the Twitchification of the experience, where it's not just about like, hey, turn on and you're watching the band, which you could do maybe on other platforms. There's a Twitch feature, right, where the people are actually answering, hey, what's your favorite, tour stop? What's this? This is asking questions, and the artists during performances are taking a moment to say, hey, Jane from Japan, great for tuning in. We love you, and to answer your question, here it is. So there's engagement there that's been on a different level, which is different than just sort of the standard streaming stuff. So we see that as a way forward, and how we can potentially utilize this model in a host of our rooms, right, outside of just Brooklyn, New York. We could maybe do this, in the greater New York City and/or Los Angeles. Paul, to your question, that's what AEG is doing. Our competition, Live Nation, has actually wired up 60 of their venues, working with a company called Veep, which is the Madden brothers from Good Charlotte.
But before we get into that, though, let me just bring the other folks into the conversation here. Joe, the live music business obviously saw a lot of disruption, but the video streaming business had, saw enormous growth, both in the amount of time people were spending watching streamed video content, the number of outlets they were watching it from, the time that they were engaging with it. Has that faded at all? Do you expect it to fade? Where does FilmRise, at least, which one of the things that one of the particular areas of video streaming that saw a lot of increased activity was in the AVOD, the ad-supported VOD space, which is where FilmRise plays. So where do you see that curve headed?
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic hit, and it felt as if it just accelerated behavior that we'd already been seeing happen, right? We were already hearing about cord cutting. We're already hearing about more and more people subscribing to SVOD services, first 1, then 2, then 3, multiple SVOD services for a home. So COVID-19 accelerated a shift that we were already seeing for several years. And frankly, I don't see it slowing down, especially as people realize, hey, I can watch great content that I thought was only behind a paywall and now for free. This seems great. I could save money and also see amazing content that I already wanted to see. So that is definitely our POV, which is we don't see it slowing down. And from the FilmRise perspective, we've been playing in the AVOD space almost a decade before the majors got in there. Believe it or not, there was a time when people just gave away AVOD rights for free. They didn't even see the value in it. They would just say, oh, you can take it as part of a broadcast deal. And now we see it's massively, it's incredibly valuable. So FilmRise had already been in the space, and because we've been there for so long, kind of setting the tone as to what a deal should look like, how it should be framed up, we were the best position to take advantage of it when AVOD essentially exploded last year. So we were able to rapidly accelerate and scale up, and I see it continuing.
And you've done a couple of big deals recently. There was the Maverick Entertainment deal, which like 300 titles, I think. Have you done deals of that scale before? or is is that reflective of a ramp up in
Yeah, there are some major, there's major IP that FilmRise had previously acquired, like Unsolved Mysteries, for example. Acquired several years ago when the industry was undervaluing it. And because FilmRise is a data-driven company primarily, people always think being part of acquisitions means you watch a cool movie or a TV show and you say, that seems cool in my opinion. But it's really not that. And FilmRise especially is very data driven to see what is it that the market really wants using unique algorithm. So we have previously acquired major IP like Unsolved Mysteries, which later saw a reboot on Netflix, which we think is directly related to us. But something like the Maverick deal was a volume play. And I think that is really reflective of how the AVOD business and FilmRise as a whole has accelerated. And there will be more deals like that.
Michele, using the tried and true n equals 1 research methodology, we call that some people call that anecdotal data. I call it artisanal data. A lot of people listen to audiobooks in the car, and that certainly was my experience. And a lot of people stop commuting to work and were not in their car in 2020 and even this year. And yet, I saw a quote from you somewhere else recently describing 2020 as a banner year for audiobooks. So how did you buck what seemed like the natural trend?
Well, first of all, it's always been believed, really for a long time, even by audio publishers, that the car was the #1 place for listening, but it hasn't been for years. It actually has been the home. So people, may commute and listen in the car, but then they come into their house, they want to get that next step in the audiobook, that next chapter in. So there has been a ton of at-home listening. And as the in-dash car player has improved, those numbers have become closer together. But for a long time, the home was really winning the game when it came to where people were listening. So just like you, who listens in the car, a lot of the audio publishers were quite nervous when we went into lockdown. Even though we had all that data that says people really do listen at home, we know a lot of people listen in their car, so we got concerned. And what happened and what we saw from retailers and heard from our retail partners is that the listening patterns changed. So in the first couple weeks, listening definitely went down, and you weren't getting that spike in the morning commute and in the evening commute. But what happened was about 3 weeks into the pandemic, people started getting into their new routines, really listening throughout the day. So we changed our times of doing things, and the curve on a daily basis flattened, but a ton of listening was still happening. And for someone like me, who didn't do a lot of car commuting, but did a lot of airplane commuting, I had to completely reconfigure what I was doing. I couldn't go to the gym, so what did I do? I went outside for a walk every day. And on that walk, I often listened to an audiobook. So my listening and many people's listening went up in the pandemic because our routines changed. But the baseline of listening at home, it was already there, and it really just strengthened. So we saw increased sales in 2020. And we also saw increased production. And that was the area that I think, again, was kind of nervous making. What happens when people can't go to a professional studio and record an audiobook? Well, again, we had an excellent baseline. For more than a decade, narrators have been recording audiobooks at home in a home studio, thank you technology, and doing everything digitally. So we were a digital business with a lot of digital production. And people who didn't have a home studio, they shared home studios. They built a home studio in the first couple months, and production continued along. We recorded over 71,000 audiobooks in 2020, which was a significant increase from previous years.
Peter, speaking of increased production, perhaps no sector has seen more increased production than the podcast sector, which ElectraCast plays in. what you know, you're not anybody anymore if you don't have a podcast. It seems. What you know, what is your read on how that space is going to evolve? Because it too, you know, listening times, listening habits, as Michele was just explaining, you know, shifted during the pandemic. Did that help or hurt the podcast space?
Yeah, Michele brought up some really good points. First of all, a couple things happened. People's ability to make their own schedule and determine their own listening time was a big advantage to the growth. But also, ironically, on the production side, the tools that really leveled the playing field became much more common, primarily because of the fact that everybody, whether they're in production or not, was required to have what we're doing right now, a computer with Zoom and a mic. And in the world of podcasting, that's basically how 95% of all the productions are done. I own and occupied 14 recording studios, and that was why I launched this company, with the idea that, oh my God, we've got a facility and we've got a huge advantage in the world of audio production. Strangely enough, once everybody started using Zoom to record these shows, there was really, the bar was lowered, the barrier of entry was lowered, and anybody who was using the tools that they would for normal daily work is now capable of producing a competitive podcast, right? And although I want to say that the general quality of production might have been lowered slightly, it did allow a tremendous amount of new entries into the industry. And you know, it shifts what makes something successful. In the end, it's always going to be competition for your attention, traffic, right? This is the attention economy. So as long as you have the tools, primarily social media is the least expensive, what we call owned media. There's owned, earned, and paid, right? Then you're going to always have that opportunity to produce and to market. And it's fascinating how podcasting has created an entirely new industry for the attention economy to flourish from home.
And where is podcasting in general sort of settling within the IP, content licensing ecosystem?
This is a great question because in the end, the ability for people just to create and talk and create talk shows, right, is super simple. But when it comes to the rights and the farming of IP and the incubating of properties that we like to call audio first, FilmRise, I'm sure, is looking as much at podcasts at potential IP as anywhere else. The old, of course, standard was books, right? We optioned the film rights for a book. But if you look at Showtime, HBO, Amazon, Netflix, even their top 10 shows, at least one of them is probably, incubated packaged as a podcast. I can cite one example at our company. We have a really fun show. It was presented to me as a TV show. A female director, writer named Jennifer Nash came in and said, I've got this idea. I wrote it. It's a collection of stories from all of my friends. We want to do this as a TV series. And I said, Jennifer, with all due respect, you're an unknown. Television is not going to bet the farm on an unknown producer, writer, director for a TV show. But what we can do with low barrier to entry and lower risk is create the podcast. If we can build the package and the property and the audience and the streaming and of course the traffic, you've got a much better chance of approaching somebody like Joe and saying, hey, we can bring an audience. And point in case, we went out and got Sherilyn Fenn from Gilmore Girls and Shameless and Twin Peaks, Eric Roberts, Ed Asner, rest his soul, Victor Ward from Walking Dead, Jennifer Cox from Web Therapy, and Tim Dern from Star Trek. Now we've got like household name actors in this property. The thing is in post. It has not even been published yet, and we're getting calls about the television rights. So by all means, when you think about developing a large scale project, it could be a $500,000 just to get it to the starting gate. For 1/10 of that price, not only did we entirely develop and package the thing, but we've produced it and we can distribute it. So by all means, it's a great way to develop new IP.
Interesting, interesting. Just a reminder to folks, if you have questions for any of the panelists, you can put them in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to them at the end. Bret, Peter brings up an interesting pattern of IP crossing the species barrier, in the music and games world seem increasingly to be converging into a single thing. There's obviously quite a lot of demographic overlap between the gamer audience and the music audience. How do you see that sort of cross-pollination playing out?
Well, I think this Twitch AEG Bowery Presents partnership is a great example of taking individuals and or gamers that are into absorbing content and then offering up another passion point, which is music and in sort of a live setting. And Twitch as an example is really sort of betting on that they can take a whole sort of segment of gamers and introduce them into sort of the music space. But I think all in all, you look around the festival landscape. We've worked a long time with the likes of Sony and Xbox, and I think it plays right into the fact that these individuals are up for fun experiences and so on, and that if they're playing games at home, that they're coming to music festivals in some capacity, and we're going to offer up some experiences for them, and that's why Sony and Xbox are showing up and doing some really fun things inside of these big events.
Michele, obviously these days a book comes out and there's almost always an audio book at some point derived from that. But are publishers thinking in terms of where an audio book might stop and a podcast begins? I mean, how do podcast based on books that's become a fairly active area. Where do you see that?
It's essentially a new right, a new layering on. Just like a book might be dramatized for an audiobook, it could be dramatized for a podcast. So that is a different right that you're selling. The way that it is built into the contract is kind of new. We went from an industry that was on cassette to CD to digital. Now we have to deal with more of the podcast and dramatization rights, and also streaming. All of those different things are layered in. And we're starting to see more books, as streaming video services arise. We're seeing more books turned into movies that are done by a streaming service. So I think the job of anyone who is in book rights now in that sub-right department is much bigger. It's pretty typical for audiobooks to be done on titles, as you mentioned, and that's often done by the publisher who publishes the book. So now your department is focusing more on selling film rights, looking at podcasts, all of those different things. So it's a lot more nuanced and a lot more layers, and seems like a lot more lawyers involved.
It's always more lawyers. And one of the things that's sort of happened in the last, I don't know, 18 months, 2 years, you've seen more elaborate audio first productions, which begin as an audio piece, often with music, sound effects, multiple voice actors involved, which then get turned into books. So Malcolm Gladwell has done a number of these. And
we're sort of returning to the past, right? Those old time, radio versions of things that become other properties. I think in a digital world, we're just better at saying, oh, we're connected to this story, we're connected to these characters, and now we can turn it into other forms. And it doesn't necessarily start always as a book anymore. It might end as a book these days. So I think that there's a lot of creativity that's coming into the space, and people are willing to try more things, which is really exciting. As we all spend more time in our house, we're looking for those entertainment venues. And if we get connected to something, to be able to have it in a book, an audiobook, a podcast, and then a television show gives us lots of ways to really tap into whatever it was in the story and the characters that intrigued us in the first place. So ultimately, it's that source material on some level that has to be really strong.
And Joe, how do you see the sort of sequence of windowing in the streaming space evolving? I noticed that you guys recently licensed a British series for AVOD called Line of Duty, which I recall my wife and I watching on an SVOD platform. I can't remember which one, Acorn maybe, or I don't think it was Netflix. So, I mean, does SVOD come before AVOD? Does AVOD come before SVOD? Does it not matter?
Right. I think, kind of adding to Michele's point, the sequence of windowing is no longer cemented. There's no longer a rule that we see broadcast, then we see, SVOD, then we see AVOD. There's really no reason. It really depends on the IP. It depends on how the producers are all coming to the table early on. And yeah, the rules of the road there are no rules. And it really is just project by project. And I think it's important for all of us, as well as everyone in this industry, to remember that, because that innovation is what's helped us through COVID and will continue on in that, there are no rules you have to think that are the Bible that you have to stick with.
We're coming up on time here. I don't see any audience questions, so either we've completely exhausted this topic, or you folks were just so thorough in your answers that you've managed to cover all the points. So I'll throw it up into the panel. If anybody has some closing thoughts on what we've just been discussing. Whoa, wait, I just saw a question.
I mean, I'll just add one thing that Michele touched on, which is the source material. It's fascinating that a lot of authors would record interviews before writing books. And what we're experiencing is that those interviews become now valuable as a source of content. And in some cases, depending on whether there's audio available or not, it may actually make the rights to the book more valuable, and of course, the ability to stream and edit for additional platforms, primarily podcast or audiobooks are usually produced specifically to be that. But there's this new advent of live audio that everybody's doing. Clubhouse, etc. It seems to me like there's just going to be more and more opportunity to not only access and create that audio, but to exploit it in other ways, and that will lead to just more and more content and rights and lawyers.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Thank you very much to each of you. We really appreciate your sharing your thoughts, and we'll be back here at the top of the hour with a new topic around the licensing and payment of news content on digital platforms, and we have a terrific international lineup of speakers to talk about that. So once again, thank you all, and we'll see you at the top of the hour.